think people in the state of Virginia and elsewhere are having to come to grips with the fact that extreme weather is a phenomenon that's increasingly occurring, much along the lines of what it is that has been predicted by scientists and other observers in the past. There may be a sense that there may not be a lot being done about these extreme weather events, and there may not be as much movement on the federal level as some folks might like to see. But in fact, if you look hard, you'll see at the local level and at the state level often there's a lot more going on than meets the eye.
Virginia's Department of Transportation manages 57,867 miles of roads. Ensuring a state of good repair requires managing extreme weather events. As Virginia is experiencing the onset of increased weather variability, different staff members within Virginia's Department of Transportation are proactively responding. Steve Long, VDOT's State Environmental Administrator, shed some light on what adaptive measures were being taken within the organization.
I know our Research Council in Charlottesville is doing some work on it. They're working with our structure and bridge engineers. And I know they're looking more at the potential of, if sea level rises, our bridges need to be longer, taller. How do you handle it? And of course, your culverts or anything would have to be sized larger to handle more flow. And they pretty much work on that because environmentally, I don't know, we may have a lot more wetlands. Sea level rises, things that weren't wetlands will be wetlands. And so people don't realize that Eastern Virginia is pretty flat, and you put a couple extra feet of water on, a lot of things are going to be wet that weren't wet. So it's going to kind of change the ecology of Eastern Virginia gradually. Virginia Beach may not, the waterfront of Virginia Beach may be back a mile from where it is now.
In August of 2011, the Federal Transit Administration issued a report. The objective of the report was to provide transit professionals with information and analysis relevant to adapting U.S. public transportation assets and services to changes in weather impacts. It focuses on the importance for organizations to complete a vulnerability assessment, engage in risk management, and take on adaptive planning measures. With a vulnerability assessment, an organization looks at its infrastructure and assesses which pieces are most vulnerable to extreme weather. Think of this as a fact-finding mission for the organization. Risk management calls for the organization to use the findings from its vulnerability assessment to develop a plan for managing risks posed to the infrastructure by extreme weather. Think of this as prioritizing risk and making a plan. As plans for prioritizing risk management are made, they're analyzed. If better methods for managing risk emerge, these new methods are implemented. Think of adaptive planning as a mode of continually adapting best practices. VDOT has undergone some preliminary adaptive management in the Hampton Roads District of Virginia. This image is an email from a state structure and bridge engineer within VDOT. A hurricane vulnerability study on movable bridge structures, a storm surge vulnerability study on the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, the Monitor Merrimack Memorial Bridge Tunnel, and the James River Bridge have been performed. Steve Long elaborates more on some of VDOT's adaptive management plans.
Well, I'll speak for our structures and bridge engineer since he can't be here today. They're doing a new bridge manual that lets them know, lets the designers as a manual. Bridge engineers are real structured. They're engineers and they're going to follow the rules. So their guidebook they use, they're updating is to address more rain, more extreme weather events, higher sea levels, things like that. They're addressing their guidance. They're looking at all our movable bridge structures, our lift spans, swing spans over the rivers in Eastern Virginia to see if they're secure, especially the housings that house all the motors and the gears and things are pretty low, and you want to make sure you don't get a tidal surge and flood that and have issues. And another consideration with higher rainfalls, how does it affect the width and the height and the length of the bridge needs to be to handle the water under it. because you may get more extreme weather events where you have more, say, more hurricanes, more floods. You know, maybe you'll be dry and then have a bad storm event, so you have to look at those things. So they're working on adaptation, and our research council up in Charlottesville that does a lot of our work through the universities is helping us with that.
Despite some of the initial strides VDOT has taken in adaptive management, secure funding and budget concerns has placed the organization in a precarious situation. A statewide summit for transportation professionals was held on December 14, 2011, in which long-term financial uncertainty was discussed. In a summary statement from the summit, it was determined that the funding sources upon which Virginia has traditionally relied to develop transportation plans, programs, and projects are in a state of flux that is likely to persist for many years. In response, the Commonwealth's leaders are working hard to establish alternative financing strategies that will improve the state's ability to reliably maintain and improve its transportation systems. Funding and budget concerns have led to austerity measures within VDOT as well.
The biggest change I have seen is VDOT grew and shrunk while I was here. At one time we had close to 13,000 employees. Now we have less than 7,000. At one time I had over 300 environmental employees, and now statewide I have 131.
Budget constraints have led to problems when ensuring a state of good repair and transportation access to Virginia residents. In Richmond, a lack of funding has led to an erosion of transit service in spite of having high-quality service in congested corridors. This is leading to disruptions which affect getting to work. In Bristol, the economy has shifted focus of land use principles away from smart growth in desperation for economic growth. It is now more difficult to communicate about smart growth and highway capacity. Financial hardship is stalling many aspects of transportation upkeep and development. If VDOT is unable to receive a secure source of funding, its adaptive management will likely face challenges in developing from its preliminary stages to a more robust and comprehensive management scheme. Possibly the greatest challenge that VDOT faces in implementing a comprehensive adaptive management plan is navigating bureaucracy. As illustrated by Michelle M. Betzel and Barry G. Rabe, local, state, and federal entities may experience increased collaboration with one another in order to accomplish long-range goals. VDOT may face regulatory challenges when attempting to implement adaptive measures.
The outside entity help would be if we could convince Congress to go back and start all over with the environmental laws and rewrite the things. What's happened, we've had 35 or 40 years of piling things on, and I've talked earlier about conflict, and you add this and you add this and you add this, all of a sudden something's so tangled up that you never can unravel it. But regulation, it does nothing to help the environment. There's a lot of that out there where it takes a lot of time and a lot of money, but it doesn't do anything. If you could spend that money on environmental enhancements instead of going through the red tape, it would be a lot better for all of us.
Virginia's Department of Transportation is in the preliminary stages of adaptive management. As extreme weather events continue to occur at higher levels of frequency, it is important that critical investments in infrastructure continue to be made, despite budget constraints. In order for adaptive measures to evolve and become more robust, it is essential that VDOT secures a stable source of funding. Additionally, policymakers must understand the need for more flexible forms of regulation. As local, state, and national entities collaborate on a more regular basis, regulation must be flexible enough to account for the needs of each level of governance. Railroads, both freight and passenger, make up a substantial portion of Virginia's transportation network. Two major freight rails dominate in Virginia, CSX and Norfolk Southern. Together they make up 85% of the privately owned commercial freight system, with smaller short line systems operating throughout the state. Railroad systems are highly susceptible to flooding. When Tropical Storm Lee hit the northern Virginia area on September 8, 2011, torrential rains flooded the CSX train tracks, shutting down VRE service. 1,500 passengers were left stranded, and there was also a huge washout of the tracks. In addition to flooding, railroads are susceptible to extreme heat. One effect of high temperatures is sun kink, where the rails expand due to the hot weather and then kink. These kinks in the tracks can cause derailments. On hot days, or those experiencing large swings in temperatures, heat orders are issued that require trains to run at slower speeds. In 2002 and 2007, CSX implemented an extensive rehabilitation project which significantly reduced heat orders. In 2008, the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation signed an agreement with CSX to work cooperatively on minimizing heat orders. The Department of Rail and Public Transportation has recognized the likelihood of the increases in high temperatures, and they recommend that the Commonwealth consider these impacts for construction and maintenance in long-term planning.
The one that comes to memory most is Hurricane Isabel, because the eastern part of Virginia didn't have any electricity for a couple weeks at a time. I mean, we were all out of electricity. Most people came to the office to take showers and do things because they didn't have any electricity at home, and people were eating out. It was just kind of weird because I don't think Virginia had anything like that such widespread since Hurricane Hazel in the early 50s. And here you are now in 2004, 2005, having a major hurricane come through. Not only did it knock a lot of trees down, but it took a lot of power out.